What I mean when I say what is the seller's story in a land transaction is what's their attitude and approach to how the transaction needs to go to be a success for them, right? So they'll have a narrative, a story about, okay, I'm going to close quick, or I need maximum price would be examples of that, right? I want a short due diligence period. I need to sell to a trusted party that I like. I've met them in person, right? That they connect with the people behind the transaction. So obviously there's infinite numbers of examples, but I think those are some good ones. And so when we approach, we need to know that the story, their narrative about how the transaction should go to be a success for them has some common ground with what we have as a story or narrative for our success in the land closing. So for us, we need long time periods, or as long as we can get to close, right? So we want to get the most amount of pre-development work done up front before we have to close land, because once you close the land, you can't give it back. You had to put money into it. If something crops up in the city process and they're like, oh, we forgot to tell you, there's a high voltage underground, line going through the middle of your site and you can't build on it. We would, ferret those things out in the beginning, but you want to hold that off as long as possible. And also the longer time periods give you more capability to adjust if something in the future changes. So let's say we go into a 6-month long escrow on a land contract, and in the third month, the coronavirus overwhelms the United States and the economy falls off and rents fall off. Well, now we have the choice to walk from the deal, right? We have the choice to say, we don't want to close. We're not obligated. We might leave them some hard money on the refundable or non-refundable deposits, but we're not, sitting with a piece of land that we can't build on and ultimately deliver units to rent. Because that's what we want, is we want a finished building that can be occupied with people renting and producing income for the project, right? That's the crux of the place we need to get to for it to be a success for us. And that backs up, multiple steps all the way back to the land and the land contract. And does our story match with the sellers? And there's got to be enough alignment, because if they, I've had sellers go, look, I need to close this thing. I'll lower my price, but you got to close in 10 days. They've literally said that. And I go, we don't close in 10 days. That's just not our style of deal. And I don't blow them up in the conversation. I go, just say, hey, that's not a fit for us. But hey, if that doesn't work, if you can't find somebody, we're still around. We love this site, I might say, and call us, we're around. If you change your mind and think a longer escrow might be appropriate, or at least longer than 10 days, right? We might say, then, we're a friendlier, if you will. There's many different stories inside of a project, right? And in fact, every person who crosses paths with us as a developer also have their own story, right? So capital has a story, the city guy, the plan checker has a story, the city council member, the planning commissioner, the land seller, the architect, I have a story, right? So in essence, my job as a developer is to coordinate all those stories so that they move generally in the right direction, which is to build a project that's successful and makes, houses families appropriately and makes yield for investors, right? And if there's any one of those stories of the whole, array of stories of all the people and all the different, parts of a deal is not coherent, right? Is flawed, weak, or incomplete part of the story, then I have to change that to make it align. I have to remove that person and put a new person in. I need to change that person's story. Hey, land seller, you're thinking you're going to close in 10 days. That's your story, but I really can't. Would you accept, a 60-day close? And they go, okay, well, if you raise the price, then yeah, I could do that, right? So I change that person's story to align with where we are, right? So I've never thought of it this way, but I'm very oriented in the learning that I do for my own, personal, strategic knowledge around the idea of a narrative, right? Which is a story in time, right? Of how we produce action to achieve an objective, right? And at the end of the day, if there's any part of that story or narrative that's missing, or weak or flawed, then we're going to say that action will be thwarted. Like an action for us is to complete a project and rent units, right? So I'm very sensitive to this. And our job, my job in a large way, is to bring people together in networks, my networks, our company's networks, that are aligned with our story. And I either have to assess them in the beginning that their story aligns, or I have to work with them to change their story to be in alignment, or I have to get rid of them. Like sometimes we do that. And I might get rid of a seller. I might say, no, that's not for us. We're here if you change your mind, but our story doesn't match with your story. I've never said it that way, but that's in this conversation, that's how I think of it.